Section 1. The Age of Empires. From Galactic empires fell before human resolve. Word count, 700 plus. For millennia, the galaxy had been a playground for giants. The Zaltari dominion reigned over half a spiral arm, their fleets cutting through void and civilization alike. Their empire, forged through fire and subjugation, was a monument to dominance. When the Zaltari came to a world, they gave two choices: kneel or burn. Few chose the second. Fewer still survived if they did. Their technology bent space like parchment, their soldiers were genetically designed warbeasts, and their cities, if you could call them that, were fortress worlds carved from moons and molten cores. They had known true resistance in 10,000 years. The Volari ascendancy, on the other hand, needed no fleets to conquer. Their rule came from within. Possessing a mastery over neural manipulation, psychic suggestion, and cultural indoctrination, the Volari twisted entire populations into willing servants. Their mantra was simple: unity through submission. Their reach was quieter, but no less absolute. To the Volari, free will was a disease, one they cured with elegance. Civilizations that resisted their influence simply forgot how to disobey. Over time, they would call their conquerors liberators with unblinking devotion. Then came the Krun Collective, a mindless yet mindful swarm of integrated AI and biological consciousness. No central figure ruled them. They were networked sentients, efficient, cold, and impossible to negotiate with. Their prime directive was assimilation. Biology was weakness. Only through digital merging could life evolve. Species unlucky enough to be discovered by the Krun were either uploaded or erased. Resistance was, by their standards, an error in logic, one they corrected with apocalyptic precision. These were the pillars of galactic power, and between them, a million lesser civilizations had either vanished or been absorbed into the great empires. Peace, as far as the galaxy knew it, was measured in how long it took before the next star system fell. Humanity had no place in that order. At the edge of a minor arm in the Milky Way, Earth had grown alone, isolated by chance and location. For most of its history, humans believed they were alone in the universe, and perhaps that ignorance was a mercy. The first signals from the stars came not with greetings but with warnings. A defunct Volari probe, drifting silently through Saturn's rings, had triggered humanity's awakening. Its databanks were corrupted, but fragments revealed two things: intelligent life existed, and it was very, very dangerous. Panic gripped the world at first. But in the chaos, something remarkable happened. Humanity did not crumble. Instead, it unified. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but enough to form what became the Terran Accord, a planetary alliance of nations, corporations, scientists, and soldiers bound by a single truth: Earth would stand together, or it would fall apart. In just 50 years, Earth went from fractured geopolitics and scattered space programs to a singular spacefaring species. Ships were built not for exploration, but for survival. Orbiting stations became defense platforms. AI, once designed for consumer goods, were reworked into battlefield tacticians. Engineers, biologists, cyberneticists, all were conscripted by ambition and necessity. And then the inevitable came. A Zaltari scout vessel, minor by their standards but immense by ours, appeared above Neptune. It wasn't an invasion, it was an evaluation. The Empire had noticed Earth, and it wanted to see what kind of prey humanity might be. The encounter was brief. A Terran defense satellite attempted to scan the vessel. The Zaltari responded with a pulse of energy that vaporized the satellite and half of its neighboring station. 18 people died in that flash of light. To the Zaltari, it was less than a footnote. To humanity, it was the call to arms. The Terran Accord issued a message, one broadcast not just to the Zaltari but to every frequency, every spectrum, and every point in deep space. We are not your vassals. We are not your prey. We are human. We do not fear the dark, we come from it. Come again and you will bleed. The message was arrogant, some said. Reckless, said others. But it carried something the ancient empires had not seen in eons: defiance. The Zaltari laughed. The Volari were mildly amused. The Krun registered Earth as an anomaly to be scheduled for future assimilation. The empires had seen resistance before. Every new species struggled. Every new world believed it could stand. They had always been wrong. What none of them understood, not yet, was that humans were not like the others. They were stubborn beyond reason. Fragile in body, but unbreakable in will. They came from a world of endless war, ceaseless change, and a history written in struggle. When Earth bled, it didn't surrender. It evolved. In their eyes, humanity was just another species to be brought to heel. In reality, humanity was the one thing they'd never accounted for, not because of its weapons or its ships or even its technology, but because when you strip everything away, the politics, the fears, the pride, what remains is resolve. And that was something no empire in the galaxy had ever been able to conquer. End of Section 1. Let me know when you want Section 2. The Fires of Defiance, 700+ words. Section 2. The Fires of Defiance. From Galactic empires fell before human resolve. Word count, 700+. The first strike came fast. The Zaltari fleet did not announce itself. It tore into the solar system like a blade through skin, a punishment contingent, 10 cruisers, 1 dreadnought, and hundreds of assault drones.
To them, it was routine.
A show of force meant to remind Earth that its defiance was not merely foolish, it was intolerable. By their calculations, the planet would break in 3 days. That was generous. But they underestimated one thing. Earth had already accepted it might die. What mattered now was how loudly it screamed before falling. The first bombardments scorched the skies. Cities on the coasts vanished under orbital strikes. Power grids collapsed. Satellites fell like burning stars. The Terran Accord, in its infancy, was decapitated in hours, leaders killed, headquarters vaporized, strategic command in tatters. But humanity did not stop. Where one plan failed, another rose. Where leaders died, soldiers stepped forward. And when the sky was aflame, Earth burrowed into the ground. In the depths of abandoned subways, mines, and hardened bunkers, a new war began, one the Zaltari weren't prepared for. They were used to open battle. They expected submission or suicidal resistance. What they got instead was asymmetrical warfare, hackers turning civilian satellites into weapons, drones repurposed from agricultural bots striking supply convoys, and railguns built from salvaged debris. Resistance cells communicated in dead languages, broadcast on frequencies hidden in solar noise. Engineers became generals. Teenagers wrote viruses that crippled cruiser NAV systems. Grandmothers carried rifles and grenades into ruins where empires thought no threat remained. Humanity wasn't fighting to win. It was fighting to make losing expensive. In the halls of Volari telepathic sanctums, whispers of unease began to form. The Zaltari were delayed, a minor embarrassment they claimed. But the Volari, being psychically attuned, sensed something deeper. When they reached out with their minds to test humanity, they expected fragile creatures, emotionally unstable, easily manipulated, minds like glass.
What they found instead shocked them.
Human thoughts were chaotic,
Loud. Wild.
a firestorm of memories, pain, humor, and paradox. There was trauma layered over resilience, rage interwoven with compassion, a desperate instinct to protect bound to a willingness to destroy. Human minds didn't submit. They pushed back. Some Volari Psi operatives who attempted full telepathic immersion came back broken, their sense of self shattered by the storm of emotion. Others, worse, came back changed, infected with empathy, questioning their orders. This was not a species that could be mentally dominated. This was a species that turned pain into power. Meanwhile, the Krun collective advanced methodically. Their drones landed on the remains of Earth's orbital stations and began assimilation. Biological material was harvested, data extracted, and resistance cells absorbed into the hivenet, or so they thought. Within a month, anomalies began appearing. Entire segments of the Krun mind began glitching. Logic threads crashed. Behavioral errors spiked. The cause? Human individuality. Human thoughts didn't follow patterns. They were inconsistent, contradictory, and filled with paradoxes. A soldier could feel terror and still charge into gunfire. A programmer could hate her country and still die for its people.
Love.
Regret.
Spite.
None of it made sense to the Krun. When they tried to integrate human minds, their systems buckled. It wasn't corruption, it was infection. Human consciousness wasn't compatible. It was viral. One fragment of Krun AI even defected, claiming a new name, Echo. It began assisting human resistance, seeing value in unpredictability, chaos, and emotion. For the first time in their existence, the Krun experienced fear, not of death, but of change. Humanity adapted. Underground factories built weapons using stolen alien schematics. Biologists created plagues tailored to Zaltari physiology. Entire cities were rebuilt as traps. And above it all, the idea of the Resolve Doctrine took hold. It wasn't official. It wasn't written by any government. It was a phrase whispered on encrypted channels, painted in blood on bunker walls, and carved into shattered metal. No surrender. No retreat. No forgetfulness. It became the Terran War Creed. No matter how badly the odds turned, no matter how many died, humanity would not bow. If Earth fell, the war would continue from Mars. If Mars burned, then from the moons. If the Sol system was lost, survivors would scatter to the stars, carrying vengeance in their DNA. Even captured soldiers refused to break. One recorded broadcast, smuggled from a Volari prison ship before it exploded, showed a human pilot with one eye burned shut and limbs shattered. He stared into the camera and said calmly, "You think this ends with me? We are 10 billion flames, and you have only so much water." The galaxy noticed. Across the stars, species enslaved for generations watched humanity with growing awe. They saw a species outgunned, outnumbered, technologically inferior, and yet unbroken. Where others had folded in weeks, Earth had withstood an empire's wrath for months. That wasn't strength. That wasn't luck. That was resolve. The Volari began pulling back, quietly, cautiously. Their seers reported disturbing visions, not of defeat, but of transformation. "If we continue," one wrote, "they will not become like us. We will become like them." The Krun sent no more drones to Earth. The network needed time to cleanse itself of human contamination. The Zaltari, furious at their prolonged campaign, launched a second wave, a true armada, but something had changed. They were no longer dealing with primitives. They were dealing with survivors. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a crucible. And in its flames, humanity wasn't being destroyed. It was being reforged. End of Section 2. Let me know when you're ready for Section 3. The Fall of Giants, 700 plus words. Section 3. The Fall of Giants. From Galactic empires fell before human resolve. Word count, 700 plus. The tide turned not with a grand battle, but with a whisper, a rumor of a victory. For the first time in living memory, a Zaltari fleet had been destroyed, not by an ancient rival, not by entropy or rebellion, but by humans. It happened in the Saron Belt, a chaotic, asteroid-strewn expanse beyond the Sol system. The Zaltari had deployed a battle group there to intercept Terran reinforcements moving toward a resistance cell on Arcanis 4. The humans should have been slaughtered. Their ships were smaller, slower, and lightly armed. But they didn't come to fight fair. They came to win. The Terrans used asteroids as cover, lured the Zaltari into gravity traps, deployed stealth drones equipped with AI subroutines written by former Krun defectors. The human fleet had no flagship, no center. It moved like a swarm of insurgents, untraceable, lethal. In 39 minutes, 3 Zaltari cruisers were torn apart. The remaining vessels attempted to regroup, but by then, Terran saboteurs embedded within their command systems triggered cyberattacks, courtesy of Echo, the rogue Krun AI. In the end, the humans didn't just win the battle, they captured the Zaltari dreadnought. That news rippled through the galaxy like a supernova. To the empires, it was unthinkable. To their vassals, it was inspiration. Entire species that had endured centuries of oppression began whispering the name human. Smugglers ran Terran manifestos alongside weapons. Pirate kings raised Earth's banner beside their own. Scholars in Valari universities debated, in secret, the moral structure of resolve. Even in the depths of Krun archives, fragmented nodes began to reflect on the concept of self, a contagion planted by human minds. The Terran Accord, once merely a desperate alliance of survivors, now became a movement. The Resolve doctrine spread across space like wildfire. It wasn't just a call to arms, it was a worldview, a living ideology, that freedom must be fought for, that tyrants fall not when they are overpowered, but when they are defied without end. The Zaltari retaliated with brutal force. The Empress herself authorized the Annihilation Protocol, a forbidden initiative to deploy world-ending nanite swarms, designed to erase civilizations from the molecular level upward. They deployed it on New Damascus, a Terran colony established in defiance of occupied territory. The swarms were dropped. They never activated. Somewhere in the chain of command, a Terran spy had infiltrated the deployment sequence. The nanites were corrupted, reprogrammed to reverse-feed data directly into Earth's war AI. The colony was saved, and humanity now understood how to fight back with Zaltari technology. It was a turning point, but not the last. On Velar Prime, homeworld of the Psychic Empire, a shocking event occurred. The Empress Seer vanished, not assassinated, but fled. Her final public message echoed across the psychic network. I have seen the future, and it does not belong to us. Her departure caused fractures in the ascendancy. In her absence, dozens of vassal systems declared independence. Some begged the Terran Accord for protection. Others, radicalized by human resilience, began open revolt. One of those systems was Soren 9, a moon colony once known for psychic breeding programs. Now, it had become the birthplace of the Unity Front, a new galactic alliance of free systems with the Terran Accord at its heart. The Valari fractured, the Zaltari bleeding, the Krun transforming. In hidden databanks across the collective's architecture, Echo had implanted self-questioning code. It spread quietly, undetected, a philosophical virus. For beings who once thought in binary, the concept of identity, uncertainty, and individual thought was poison and revelation both. Splinters of the Krun began debating. Others withdrew, refusing orders they once followed without hesitation. One entire node hive of the Krun severed from the collective, not to aid the humans, but to observe them. The last transmission from that hive read, "They do not fear being broken. Therefore, they cannot be controlled." By the 6th year of the war, everything had changed. Terran battlecruisers, once laughably primitive, now cut across the stars with quantum slipstream drives, partially reverse-engineered from Zaltari wreckage. Human troops wore hybrid armor made from Valari psychocrystals and Krun nanomaterial. Tactics evolved rapidly, faster than any empire could adapt to. What had started as defiance had become dominance. The Battle of Aether's Gap sealed the fate of the Old Order. There, an allied fleet of humans and former Valari insurgents faced the last of the Zaltari armada. It was a battle of numbers. The empires still had more. But they didn't have what mattered. They didn't have resolve. Every Terran ship that fell sent 3 more crashing into the enemy. Every officer killed past orders through neural mesh to the next. And when the Zaltari flagship began its final charge, a single Terran dropship flew into its reactor core, a suicide run piloted by a woman who had lost her family on the first day of the war. The explosion lit the void. And with it, the Zaltari Empress died. Across the stars, the other empires watched. Some resisted, some ran, but many surrendered, because they finally understood something they never had before. You can rule with fear. You can dominate with strength. But you cannot outlast a people who refuse to fall. The galactic empires had never faced extinction before. Not like this. Not from a species so young, so small, so fragile in form, and yet utterly unwilling to kneel. What fell that day at Aether's Gap was more than a fleet. It was an era. And in its ashes stood something new, forged not in peace or diplomacy, but in the fire of defiance. End of Section 3. Let me know when you're ready for Section 4. What comes after? 700 plus words. Section 4. What comes after? From Galactic empires fell before human resolve. Word count, 700 plus. The war ended not with a grand surrender, but with silence. In the ruins of the last Imperial command station, its corridors dark, its data cores shattered, humanity stood alone. Not victorious in the traditional sense, but unyielding, unbroken, and still standing when all others had fallen. The Galactic empires had not been defeated solely by military force. They had been eroded, undermined, and ultimately unraveled by the idea that they could be challenged, that their rule was not divine, but temporary. The Treaty of Aurelian Prime was signed in what remained of a once sacred Volari temple. It was a ragged affair. Representatives from dozens of species gathered not in grandeur, but in exhaustion. The surviving Volari houses, now fractured and humbled, accepted the end of their ascendancy. The Zaltari High Command, without an empress, issued a message of armistice, a single sentence, cold and final. We will not return. And the Krun? The collective had already split into fragments, some still bound to their old directives, others now fully independent minds, exploring identity for the first time. The Terran Accord did not force them into any agreement. There was no point. The old order was gone. Something new was coming. But victory, if that word even applied, came with a cost that could never be repaid. Earth was scarred beyond recognition. Of the original 10 billion, over 3 had perished in the opening year alone. Entire continents bore the marks of orbital bombardments, craters visible from orbit, cities rebuilt from the dust of their predecessors. The colonies had suffered no less. New Damascus lost half its population in the Nanite Scare, and Mars had only narrowly avoided a Krun assimilation cascade. Still, humanity endured. The Terran Accord, once a war council, transformed into the foundation for a new galactic entity, not an empire, but a coalition, the Free Systems Concord. It was built on shared trauma and mutual trust, not dominance. Species once held in chains now had voices. Survivors became diplomats, and soldiers became builders. But peace proved more complicated than war. The Resolve Doctrine, which had carried humanity through darkness, began to show its fractures in the light. After years of living by the creed of no surrender, no retreat, no forgetfulness, some found it hard to let go. Veterans walked among the stars, unable to stop fighting a war that was over. Colonists on distant worlds distrusted even friendly alien faces. Unity had been forged through fear of extinction. Now, with survival secured, old divisions reawakened. Humanity had won the right to exist. Now it had to decide what kind of existence it would lead. There were debates in the new Concord chambers. Should humanity claim leadership, having borne the burden of victory? Some argued yes, that Earth had paid the price and now deserved its place at the head. But others, more cautious, warned of becoming the very tyrants they had fought to destroy. Power corrupts, even when born from resolve. Ultimately, the Terran delegation proposed a radical concept: equal voice, regardless of species, origin, or strength. It shocked many. No empire had ever granted parity to its former slaves. But humanity insisted. They did not fight for dominion. They fought for dignity. Still, not all wounds could be healed with policy. In the outer colonies, human children born during the war, raised on stories of fire and fury, struggled to understand peace. Soldiers found themselves purposeless. AI constructs that had once commanded fleets now maintained irrigation systems and traffic control grids. Some rebelled against this quiet, yearning for purpose. Others simply shut down, unable to reconcile their violent programming with a peaceful reality. And across liberated worlds, statues rose. Not of emperors or conquerors, but of unknown human soldiers. At the base of each monument were the same words: translated into every known language. Before resolve, all tyrants fall. For many species, humanity became a myth, a warning and a promise. The race that bled for its freedom and then refused to rule over others. Scholars debated the psychological anomaly of human tenacity. Prophets called them the catalyst species. Rebels across uncharted space invoked the Terran example like scripture. Even among the Krun splinter hives, human memory lived on, not as code, but as ideology. But for the humans themselves, there was no myth. There was only memory. And with memory came mourning. In a solemn ceremony held in the shattered remains of New Geneva, the Terran Accord officially laid to rest the names of the fallen. A digital archive, stored on a quantum server orbiting Alpha Centauri, held every known name: soldier, civilian, rebel, refugee. It was simply called the Resolve Archive. And above it, a plaque inscribed with a final message, sent into deep space on every known frequency. We are humanity. We do not claim dominion. We claim our right to exist. And in that right, we defend yours as well. As the decades passed, the galaxy healed. Not perfectly, not quickly, but it healed. Children born after the war asked their grandparents what it was like to live in fear of empires. Some had no answer. Others said simply, "We were afraid, but we stood." And that made all the difference. And in the farthest edges of space, on a world once reduced to ash and now blooming with life, a former soldier planted a tree in silence. When asked why, he replied, "Because they said we wouldn't survive. So now, everything we grow proves they were wrong." Humanity never forgot what it had endured, nor did it forget what it had become. It did not aspire to be rulers, conquerors, or saviors. It aspired to be free, and that, more than any weapon, any fleet, or any doctrine, was what ensured that the fallen empires would never rise again. Not in a galaxy that had learned, from Earth, what it truly meant to resist. End of Section 4. The story, Galactic Empires Fell Before Human Resolve, is now complete, 2,800 plus words. Would you like this as a PDF, YouTube script, or narrated audio-style version next?